Katy Lees here, Principal 340B Compliance Advisor with Virtue 340B. I thought I'd just jump on and talk about the 340B Winter Coalition Conference. So that took place this week in San Diego, and it's always, I hadn't actually been to the Winter Coalition Conference since 2020. It's just, traveling there from New York is a very long trip. It's a super short conference. It's barely a day and a half unless you do some of the pre-conference stuff. But, with so much going on this year, I definitely, felt like I had to be there, just not only for the conference itself, but just, to touch base with people, to see what others are experiencing, like what some of their plans are. For example, in my last video, I talked just briefly about the CMS's OPPS drug acquisition cost survey. So it was good to just, hear what others are thinking, what their plans are with regard to responding or not responding to that survey. But yeah, the networking is what's always gold at all of these, and just seeing all the familiar faces. But I will say I didn't see as many of the familiar faces. I felt like, I think there was some conflicting things. Again, not the winter conference is not quite as well attended as the summer conference, but a lot of new faces in 340B. It was a large crowd, and it did seem like there was a lot of new faces there. The biggest topic was, it's been something I've been talking about a lot lately, was the maximum fair price changes. So that was probably, when I was picking my sessions, there's so many options, but when I was picking the sessions that I was going to attend, if there was something in that category, that's what I gravitated to, because, that is what we're dealing with. There's so much going on, but a lot of it's speculation, like, how is Eli Lilly's policy going to move forward? Is HRSA going to say anything? Our covered entities, what should we be doing? That type of situation, and also the rebates. Like, it's all very speculative and trying to figure out what may happen, how we might handle it. But the MFP thing, that's real. That's the reality that we're living in. So, those were very helpful to attend, and just, hear that others are having very similar experiences. Everyone is struggling, which wasn't a surprise. I guess a few of my takeaways in that aspect is my experience is I've seen that most of the manufacturers are not paying the MFP rebates to covered entities that have their own pharmacies. But from what I heard at the conference, that's not necessarily everyone's experience. There's many covered entities that are seeing it go the other way, that they are receiving these MFP rebates that they should not be receiving. And it's almost to a point where they're worried about being able to reconcile that, because, the manufacturers, how it works is they're not supposed to recoup that money. If they pay you an MFP rebate that you're not supposed to receive, they don't necessarily take that back. They're just going to offset it with a later rebate. But if you keep getting these MFP rebates that you are not supposed to receiving, that really poses the problem of the covered entities that they're not going to have enough activity to offset that. So, there was questions on how do we handle that. There was a really great session with two members of the CMS team. And I will say my expectations were super low on, what types of information they were going to share or what types of questions they would answer. But they were really helpful and knowledgeable. It really gave me a lot of faith in needing to follow up with CMS and ask questions of them going forward. Because like I said, they were just very open. If there were things that, this is still in development. Like they said that multiple times, is that this had to go live. There wasn't a ton of time. I guess in some ways it was out there for a while, but this was implemented in fairly short order. And so they're still working on it, like the question on how do we handle it if a covered entity has to maybe just separately pay back a manufacturer if they've received too many MFP rebates. That's something that the manufacturer and the covered entity would have to take care of. But then you still already have this, you need that to be accounted for in the MTF. So that doesn't necessarily exist today, but they certainly said that they're going to, take that back as feedback to evaluate. they shared that there are certain codes in the MTF report that indicate if the MFP rebate was not paid because the transaction was believed to be 340B. They cited, and it was, I wish I had it in front of me. I'm sorry that I don't, but it was like a pricing indicator in the MTF claims report. And if it was a 0.4, then that was the indicator that the MFP rebate was not paid because it was indicated to be 340B. But I will say in a separate section on also the same topics, I heard conflicting information that there's a different indicator. So I will say it's more about, my takeaway from that was I need to dig into the details and determine what, validate that information myself. But it's helpful to know that there is, assuming, once you identify it and understand it, that there is a field in just the MTF report that would indicate that 340B, because, it's not as easy to pair that information with the reporting from Beacon to be able to know that it was indicated as 340B pricing. So, that helped a little bit. Again, I haven't gone back in and really dug into those details too much yet to verify those fields for myself. But, if we only need the MTF report to, not have to marry these three different sources together, that's helpful. You still need your internal report to know if it truly was a 340B transaction. But yeah, no, that was very helpful. Another part that I was hearing, was helpful to hear more about was the dispute process. I haven't personally gone through that dispute process yet. And I guess to back up, the dispute process being if you identify transactions that either were 340B and you got an MFP rebate, so you have to go into Beacon and identify that, say this was a 340B transaction, so that they'll, kind of reverse that MFP rebate. Not surprisingly, that's easy. You just push the button and I think it gets, updated. On the flip side, if they're saying it was a 340B transaction, not paying the MFP rebate, but that's inaccurate, and you need to dispute that to say this was not a 340B transaction, we need the MFP rebate. Of course, that's much more difficult. Again, I have not gone through this myself yet, but this is what I heard about from multiple parties at the conference, is that what they are requesting is Beacon provides an invoice, a 340B invoice from 2025, and the covered entity is expected to find all of the transactions that correspond with that 340B invoice and submit it to 340B ESP. I will say there must be some method to that, of how they came up with that, but I don't really get it. So if we're trying to say this was not a 340B transaction, why wouldn't we be asked to provide a corresponding non-340B invoice to show that we have this activity? Or, if you're going to request data, I could more understand providing all of, the data. So here's the prescriptions. Here are the 340B prescriptions that we in 2026 that are in scope of this program, the MFP program. These are the 340B transactions and these are not the 340B transactions, something along those lines. I don't really understand getting a random 340B invoice. And from what I'm hearing, it could have absolutely nothing, be like a totally different setting even than the transaction that's being disputed. I just don't really understand that. So I'm not sure as I move forward myself through that dispute process, I'm not sure that I'm necessarily just would be open to following what's being requested. Again, it needs to make sense and it needs to, just support what we're trying to dispute. So I don't know, more to come on that, but it was very helpful to hear, everyone's thoughts on that and their experiences. And I guess for better or worse, it's nice to know that we're all just experiencing the same things, but every person that shares their experience, I feel like it's helpful to others. Then, of course, the other hot topics were the Eli Lilly, their policy that was released in mid-January and went live February 1st, requesting data that is associated with all 340B transactions in any setting. I talked about that a bit in my last video as well. So we're all just waiting to see what happens. I guess, most covered entities, I don't even know if I can say most covered entities. I think covered entities are trying to figure out, should they comply with that policy? What's going to happen if they don't? Is Eli Lilly really going to be allowed to remove our pricing if we don't provide data? But, I don't know. I'm not telling anyone to or not to provide data. That's definitely something that each covered entity should be evaluating and in weighing the risks versus the, rewards. If not, well, rewards isn't really the right terminology in this case, but just weighing all of the factors and, make the right decision for each covered entity. And it seems, HRSA just still isn't saying anything. And, I spoke to a couple, at least one lawyer in the space, and because I certainly am not that. But, she was saying that HRSA needs to take action before anyone else can really take action. So if HRSA takes a stance, then, AHA or 340B Health or covered entities could maybe take some legal action to push HRSA to do what they're, I'm not even going to explain this well, but basically we need HRSA to take a stance so that anyone can kind of press HRSA to do it. I don't think that any agent or any organization could just take legal action against Eli Lilly for doing this. I don't know. It's all gets very confusing in that regard. So I'm not speaking on it very, very well, but yeah, it's very interesting that HRSA hasn't taken a stance. I do worry that, the courts seem like they did leave this open as an option that might be acceptable. So I don't know, we'll just, we have another 30-ish days, it's mid-February. We have until mid-March until we're at that 40-day period of, where data needs to be submitted, or at least based on Eli Lilly's expectations, data needs to be submitted for activity as of February 1st. So, more to come on that. And then, of course, the rebates is a hot topic, which once I get through my just talking about the conference, I'll certainly want to talk a little bit about a development that happened after the conference. But I also was able to participate in a roundtable. I was one of the facilitators at a roundtable to discuss audits. Which again, it's nice to just be able to focus on regular elements of the 340B program and not just always worrying about all of this chaos. So that I felt like that was very a productive conversation. We cycled through a couple different groups. First, I was able to, I facilitated a discussion on patient definition, again, in regards to, I guess just patient definition in general, but mostly in relation to auditing, HRSA audits, or it wasn't specific to HRSA audits, but of course that's always top of mind. And when you're thinking about, even just creating your own audit program, what are HRSA's expectations? And then halfway through we switched, and it was just more the room divided into different groups based on your entity type. So hospital versus grantee. So I was, the conversation continued, and it was just a little bit more broad than still on the audit topic, but, just in general, questions or conversations about, managing that process as a hospital. So it was good discussions, talking about what expectations are. There was, I think the more nuanced topics tend to come up is the medication management programs, how those are established, and, making sure that you're able to support those, especially during a HRSA audit, some referral programs, we certainly talked about that. But even just, we talked about, I think the conversation started was just how do you qualify a patient? So I, shared how we qualify it, and, we've and just making sure that you can support that your organization is responsible for the care that resulted in that prescription or drug administration. But of course, the drug administration is generally a little bit easier because if the patient is actually at your facility receiving a drug, that's just a little bit more straightforward than a prescription being written and filled at a pharmacy. So it was a very good conversation. I will always say that, I think the most important things are just knowing your program, like determining how you are going to qualify prescriptions or, qualify patients, determine if a drug is eligible, a drug that you're administering, if that's eligible for 340B. Those are all very important decisions that you need to establish how that will work. Make sure that you've written it in your policies so that you're covered there. And then you're just testing your transactions to make sure that they're meeting your expectations, that you truly are only qualifying the prescriptions that you feel, your organization is responsible for. Even if it is through a referral program or a medication management program, you just really want to make sure that you have in your medical record the support for those transactions. And, just practice the audit. You should, I think, if anyone's been listening to me for any length of time, you know that I just always say you need to have a strong oversight program. You need to be looking at these things on a very regular cadence, making sure that you are, meeting the patient definition, that you're in audit based on how, HRSA would be doing it. Make sure that you're checking those boxes on a regular basis. Practice the full audit process. If you've never been audited by HRSA, make sure that you've been through, that you pull the data request list from the Apexis website and that you pull all of that information and you work through it. I mean, ideally you have a third party that will do that for you. We certainly can do that for you at Virtue 340B. We'll come in and do a mock audit. It's really good practice to go through all of that, to know where to get all of the information, the documentation. The process should really be managed like a project. Like you need to, when you are audited, either a mock audit or by HRSA, you need to come forward like you are very knowledgeable about your program and that you just do it in a very organized manner. Even just, at Virtue, when we're helping a client with a HRSA audit, even just how we are labeling and organizing the documents that are going to be sent to the auditor are important. So, it's like managing a project. It's very detailed and you just want to be organized and you want to, check and double check things to make sure that you're providing the right information, accurate information. Just very important, just knowing your program, knowing your data, and making sure that you're in it all the time and that you understand how things work, where drugs are moving, where you're receiving drugs, where those drugs are being, if you receive it at a mixed use pharmacy, like what's in scope of that. If you have a consolidated service center, make sure that you know what's going on there. Do you have your inventory being managed appropriately? Do you, is that written in your policies? Just making sure that you're prepared. That's the biggest thing. Like the audit process, it's a lot of work. It can be stressful, certainly being audited by HRSA, but as long as you are just prepared on any given day, like you just need to know your program and have really tight oversight processes in place. So that was, like I said, it was a very quick conference. It's a quick turnaround. I feel like it took me as long to travel to and from as I was there. But it was a great experience. The last thing that I want to talk about was the development that happened late this week, just after conference. So while we were actually at the conference, HRSA had moved forward. Maybe it was actually a few days before. HRSA had submitted the initial groundwork to the Office of Management and Budget to, again, reinitiate the rebate process, which it's kind of disheartening that they're so set on this and that it's happening so quickly. So we learned, again, I think it was right before. I want to say it was February 6th. They submitted to OMB, that initial regulatory request to move forward with the rebate. steps, and that even OMB went through that process very quickly. Early last week or mid last week, we got notification that OMB was already done with their review process, which again, nothing in the government works that quickly. So it's pretty crazy that this is being so fast tracked. And then just yesterday, we received notice that HRSA posted on the Federal Registry that they are requesting information to move towards a new rebate policy. So it's an RFI again, or request for information, where HRSA it's a little bit more promising than the before, because before, if you recall, I think it was August 1st, they posted their pilot policy in the Federal Registry and asked for comments. It was a 30-day period to receive comments, and there was no time for them to even evaluate those comments. It was very clear from the start that while they were asking for that, it wasn't really going to change much. So at least this is a formal request for information where, that information will hopefully be evaluated, and then, HRSA will determine how to move forward, whether they move forward with a rebate policy similar to before, if it's maybe slightly different, or if, please, if it could just be something different, another option. Maybe we could just have a data sharing option where we are submitting all of the same information, but still keep those upfront discounts. And then, the manufacturer has what they need, HRSA would have what they need. That would be much better. But we shall see. I did just have some notes here of, what they're specifically requesting feedback on. So administrative and operational costs to covered entities, cash flow and payment timing impacts, rebate denial standards and guardrails, data collection and reporting requirements, prevention of duplicate discounts. So, that's the whole, again, the core reason that HRSA is doing this, aside from severe pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, is this, new maximum fair price guidance or policy that the reality that we're living in now is to prevent those duplicate discounts. 340B program integrity and transparency. These are the areas that they're wanting covered entities to provide comment on. And most of us, they got an overwhelming amount of responses the first time, again, that I don't think were really evaluated. So maybe we can just reuse that. But, certainly I hope that all covered entities are going to be reviewing what they submitted the first time, and, any information that we can provide, like real life examples. So one thing that I pulled the other day, in response to this, thinking about how we will what type of narrative we'll provide. It mentions in the release on the growth of the program. It talks about how much the 340B program is worth right now. And, I think an important piece that hopefully many of us can provide feedback on is, we live in a different world. Drug pricing is just different now than it was even 2 years ago, let alone, 10 years ago, 30 years ago. It's not even that the 340, yes, there has been growth in the 340B program, but the average cost of drugs has significantly grown, again, even in the last 2 years. So, it's statistics like that I hope to bring forward, and I hope that many others will bring forward. We need real tangible examples of how the program is working, of, just to dispute some of the industry's talking points, like, for example, what I just shared. Anything we can provide that would just arm HRSA with the right information to make, the best decision going forward. So comments are due March 19th. So still, we don't have that much time. In the published policy, or not policy, but the Federal Registry information that was published indicates that, HRSA will use the information to determine whether a rebate pilot is in the public interest. So I think we all know it's not in our public's interest, but how to structure safeguards and operational parameters, and whether and how to move forward consistent with statutory authority. So, it'll be an interesting process. Again, it's surprising, kind of alarming, and kind of upsetting or concerning that it's moving this quickly. But I guess, we moved quickly to get to this request for information point. So hopefully now we can, the process will be efficient and meaningful. And again, it's our job as covered entities to provide anything we can to help HRSA evaluate this. And yeah, we'll see how this moves forward. I hope that we can provide information that convinces them that maybe the rebate isn't the way to go. It's such a big jump. Like, why can't we take, get halfway there by, again, just providing the data, but not taking away those upfront discounts? It just seems like that's just such a more sensible solution, but obviously I have a biased opinion. But yeah, we'll have to see how that all plays out. But yeah, it was, as every week is, it feels like in 340B, it was an eventful week, starting out with the conference and then ending the week with that RFI from HRSA. So, yeah, I guess that's all that I have right now. It was great catching up with all of you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Do you have a 340B compliance question? Send us a message at virtue340b.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode for more expert 340B advice. Talk to you soon.